Step off the bike, unless you want me to assume you're more trouble than you look." Faulkner's hand was already on his holster before he finished the sentence. He circled the Ducati like it was evidence at a crime scene, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. Candace Bishop stepped off the Ducati without a word. She neither struggled nor raised her voice. She just stood there in her black tank top with both hands visible. Around them, the quiet streets of Cedarwood Heights watched in silence. What Officer Faulkner couldn't have known was that the woman he treated like a criminal had spent 15 years ensuring people like him faced their deserved consequences. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The cemetery was quiet at 7 in the morning. Candace Bishop stood at her mother's grave for exactly 11 minutes. She knew because she counted. That was something the Army had done to her. Turned her into a woman who counted everything. Steps, seconds, the number of breaths between gunshots. She hadn't decided yet if that was a good thing. She placed a single white carnation against the headstone. Her mother had loved carnations. Candace didn't cry. She hadn't cried in a long time. She just stood there in the early Florida heat, in her black riding jacket and gloves, and let herself feel the weight of the day. Happy anniversary, Mama. Then she walked back to her motorcycle. The Ducati Panigale V4 was cherry red, and built like something that belonged on a racetrack. Candace had bought it 2 months ago, right at the start of her medical leave, with the first real money she'd spent on herself in 15 years of Army pay. The ankle was fully healed now. The surgery had gone well. The physical therapy had done its job, and the doctors had cleared her weeks ago. She had nothing left to recover from. She was simply finishing out the last days of her leave before reporting back to base. And the Ducati had become the best part of every single one of those days. It was hers, completely and only hers. No orders, no mission briefings, no one telling her where to point herself. Just the road and the engine and the morning air moving around her at whatever speed she chose. For 1 hour every day, she wasn't a soldier counting down the days until she went back. She was just a woman on a red bike, moving through the world on her own terms. She needed that, more than she could explain to anyone who hadn't spent 15 years being told where to go and when. Cedarwood Heights was the kind of neighborhood that looked like a postcard. Big green lawns, white houses with porches, old oak trees throwing long shadows across streets so clean you could eat off them. Candace had grown up 20 minutes from here. She knew what kind of neighborhood it was. She knew what kind of woman she was in it. She kept the speed easy and smooth, signaled every turn, both hands on the bars. Her Army veteran plate sat clean on the rear of the bike, catching the morning light. She turned onto Cedarwood Lane and let herself breathe. That was when she saw the patrol car. It pulled out from a side street and fell in behind her. A standard Cedarwood Heights PD cruiser, white and blue, moving at the same easy speed she was doing. Candace watched it in her mirror the way she watched everything, quietly, steadily, without changing her face. Maybe it's nothing. She knew it wasn't nothing. After 2 blocks, the lights came on. Candace exhaled through her nose. She checked her mirrors, signaled, and pulled over to the curb in one smooth motion. She cut the engine, pulled off her helmet, set it on the tank in front of her. She sat up straight and put her hands where they could see them. 2 officers got out of the car. The one from the driver's side was big, broad across the shoulders, with a thick neck, and the kind of face that had probably been told it was intimidating enough times that he believed it. His name tag said Faulkner. He walked toward her with his right hand already resting on his holster. Before he said a word, before she'd moved an inch, Candace clocked it, filed it, said nothing. The second officer came from the passenger side. Younger, thinner, with something eager and mean in his eyes. He didn't approach. He hung back near the front of the cruiser, his hand drifting to the taser on his hip. Watching Candace the way you watch something you've already decided is a problem. She kept her hands still, kept her face neutral, felt the familiar cold weight of being perceived as a threat simply for existing in a space where someone had decided she didn't belong. She had felt it before. She had felt it in countries where people actually were trying to kill her. These two didn't scare her. Faulkner stopped 3 feet away. He looked at the bike. He looked at her. He didn't look at her the way a police officer looks at a citizen. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already made up his mind about. He crossed his arms. "This bike," he said, "has been reported stolen." Candace looked at him steadily. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give him a single thing, because that was the first thing they always wanted. A reaction. Something they could point to. Something they could use. She wasn't going to give them anything. Not today. Reported stolen. Candace repeated the words back to him the same way she'd repeat a bad order from a superior. Flat, measured, giving nothing away. "That's not correct. I own this motorcycle." She reached into the inner pocket of her riding jacket with 2 fingers, slow and deliberate, and produced her license, registration, and insurance card in a single neat stack. 15 years of operating in situations where the wrong move could get you killed had made her precise about moments like this. Every motion visible. Every action intentional. Nothing that could be misread. She held the documents out to Faulkner. He took them, glanced at them the way you glance at something you've already decided doesn't matter, didn't read them, didn't check the name against the registration. Just held them loosely in one hand, like they were mildly inconvenient. "Where'd you get the bike?" he said. "I bought it." Candace kept her voice even. 8 weeks ago. Cash. My name is on the registration you're holding." Faulkner didn't look at the registration. Behind her, she could hear Benson moving. She tracked him in her peripheral vision without turning her head. He was circling the Ducati slowly, hands clasped behind his back, studying it like he was looking for something to find wrong with it. Like the bike itself was the problem. Like a machine that clean and that red had no business belonging to a woman who looked like Candace. "What exactly was the legal basis for this stop?" Candace asked. Faulkner ignored the question entirely. Just pulled his radio off his shoulder and called in her plate number to dispatch, his eyes drifting somewhere past her left ear like she hadn't spoken at all. Candace noted that, filed it away. Benson finished his circle around the bike and got back on his radio, talking low, calling for backup. Candace heard it clearly. She didn't react. There was nothing to react to. She was parked on a public street in full compliance, with every document in order, being treated like a suspect because 2 officers had decided that was what she was. This was not her first time in this situation. It was not even close to her first time. "Step off the bike," Faulkner said. "Am I being detained?" "I said step off the bike." Candace held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she swung her leg over the frame and stood beside the Ducati, hands fully visible at her sides. She moved calmly, deliberately. She wasn't going to give him a single thing he could use. Faulkner walked back to his cruiser with her documents and ran the plate. Candace stood in the morning heat and waited. A neighbor across the street was watering their lawn and had slowed down. The hose pointed at the grass, but their eyes pointed at Candace. She didn't look at them. She kept her focus forward. The radio crackled. The response came back clean. The Ducati Panigale V4 was registered to Candace M. Bishop. No flags, no warrants, nothing. Candace watched Faulkner's jaw tighten just slightly as he listened to the response. Watched him process the information. Watched him decide in real time that it didn't matter. He walked back toward her. handed her documents back without a word about what dispatch had just confirmed. "Got a call," he said. Neighbor reported a suspicious motorcycle riding through the area. Suspicious how? Just suspicious. That's not a legal basis for a continued stop, officer. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not uncertainty. Not yet. Just irritation. The irritation of a man who was used to people accepting whatever he said and moving on. "You got priors?" he said. The word hung in the air between them. Priors. Like it was a reasonable follow-up to a clean plate return on a bike registered in her name. Like the answer to that question had anything to do with anything happening on this street right now. Like it was a question he would have asked anyone. Candace knew he wouldn't have asked anyone. She looked at him steadily, took in the set of his shoulders, the hand still resting on his holster, the flat certainty in his face, the face of a man who had been doing this for a long time and had never once been made to answer for it. She let the silence sit for just a moment. Then she said, "No." A beat. "Do you?" The air changed. Just like that. Something went out of it. The easy confidence Faulkner had carried since he stepped out of that car. His eyes narrowed. His chin came up, and Candace Bishop looked right back at him and didn't move a single muscle. Faulkner stepped toward her. "Watch your tone," he said. Candace didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at him with the same steady calm she'd used in rooms where the stakes were considerably higher than this one. Benson came in from the side, moving fast, like he'd been waiting for a reason. "Hands on the hood," he snapped. "Right now. Let's go." Candace looked at the hood of the patrol car. Then she looked at Benson. Then she placed both palms flat on the warm metal surface, fingers spread, slow and deliberate. She complied. She always complied with the physical directions. That wasn't the battlefield. The battlefield was what came next. She straightened up as much as the position allowed, squared her shoulders, and spoke in a clear, carrying voice, loud enough for the neighbor across the street to hear, loud enough for the woman on the porch 2 houses down who had just stepped outside with her coffee. "I am complying under protest." Her voice was steady as a ruler. "I am recording this interaction. I have broken no law. I am Sergeant First Class Candace Bishop, United States Army, currently on leave. I am also a JAG-certified legal advocate, and I am formally invoking my right to know the legal basis for this continued detention." Faulkner's face went red. "Nobody asked you to make a speech," he said. "Close your mouth. That's not a legal instruction, officer." "I heard what you said." Candace kept her palms flat on the hood and kept her eyes forward. "And I'm telling you, clearly and on the record, that I am recording this stop and that I expect a lawful answer to a lawful question." Faulkner moved to her left side. She could feel him in her peripheral vision, close now, too close, the kind of close that was meant to intimidate rather than manage. He reached out and closed one hand around her wrist. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to stop talking, and I'm going to—" "I'd take your hand off her." The voice came from Candace. Quiet, certain, not a threat, something colder than a threat. A statement of fact delivered by someone who had already calculated the consequences and found them acceptable. Faulkner didn't let go, but he slowed down. "You have been recording this stop," Candace said, "since the moment you pulled up behind me on Cedarwood Lane." "So have I. My phone is mounted on the handlebars of that motorcycle, and it has been running the entire time. Every word you have said. Every word Officer Benson has said." She paused. "Every time your hand has gone to your holster." Benson made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Oh, that's cute. She thinks—" "I'm not finished," Candace said. There is a second camera built into the collar of this jacket. It faces forward. It has a 120-degree field of view, and it records in 4K. It has captured everything that has happened on this street since you activated your lights. Silence. Real silence. The kind that has weight to it. Faulkner's grip on her wrist went still. Candace let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then she continued. Under Terry v. Ohio, a lawful investigative stop requires articulable, reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. You ran my plate. It came back clean. The motorcycle is registered in my name. At that point, the legal basis for this stop was exhausted. She kept her voice completely level, the same tone she used briefing JAG cases in the field. Under Rodriguez v. United States, you cannot extend a stop beyond its original purpose without independent reasonable suspicion of a separate offense. You have no such suspicion. Which means that every second I have been standing here since that plate returned clean is an unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. She turned her head and looked directly at Faulkner. And all of it, she said, is on camera. Faulkner's hand dropped from her wrist. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, this big, certain man who had walked up to her motorcycle 40 minutes ago with his hand on his holster and his mind already made up. And for the first time since this stop began, he looked like a man who was not entirely sure of his next move. Benson stared at her from 6 feet away. His mouth was slightly open. Candace straightened up from the hood of the patrol car and turned to face them both fully. She waited. The street had gotten quieter in a different way. Not empty. There were more eyes on them now than when the stop began. The neighbor across the street had stopped pretending to water the lawn and was just standing there, phone up, filming openly. The woman on the porch 2 houses down had been joined by someone else, an older man, arms crossed, watching. A car had slowed at the far end of the block and hadn't moved on. Faulkner felt it. Candace could tell by the way his shoulders changed. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him working through it. The calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the slow and unhappy arrival at a conclusion he didn't want to reach. He glanced at the handlebar mount on the Ducati, glanced at the collar of her jacket, looked back at her face. Then he took a single step back. "You're free to go," he said. Just like that. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that he'd had his hand on her wrist 3 minutes ago, or that his plate return had come back clean before any of this escalated. He said it the way you close a door, like the conversation had simply reached its end, and whatever happened before, it didn't count. He turned and walked back toward the patrol car. Candace didn't move. "I need your badge numbers," she said to his back. "And your supervisor's contact information." Faulkner stopped walking. His back was still to her. "That is my legal right," Candace said. "Both of you." He turned around slowly. The red in his face had settled into something harder. Not embarrassment anymore. Something that looked more like a promise. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a card, and held it out without walking it over to her. She crossed the distance herself and took it from his hand. Benson pulled a card from his own pocket and held it out at arm's length, the way you'd offer something to an animal you didn't want to get close to. His eyes were flat and mean, and he didn't say a word. Candace took his card too. She stood on that sidewalk in the Florida morning heat and wrote down every number, every name, the badge numbers from both their chests, the patrol car number from the rear panel, and the time on her phone screen. She wrote slowly, and she wrote everything. She was aware of Faulkner watching her from beside the driver's door. She was aware of Benson's silence, which was louder than anything he could have said. When she was done, she folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. "Thank you," she said. Not warm, not cold, precise. She put her helmet on, fastened the chin strap, swung her leg over the Ducati, and started the engine. She did not rush any of it. She signaled before she pulled away from the curb. She kept to the speed limit the entire length of Cedarwood Lane, while the patrol car sat motionless behind her. She didn't look in the mirror once. Andrew Bishop's house was a 20-minute ride from Cedarwood Heights. Candace took the long way, not because she was lost, because she needed the road under her for a few more minutes before she went inside and became a woman with a problem to solve. She parked the Ducati in the driveway and sat on it for a moment after she cut the engine. The neighborhood was quiet. Birds somewhere. A lawnmower in the distance. She pulled her helmet off and held it in both hands and breathed. Then she went inside. The footage was better than she expected. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and both cameras connected and went through every second of it twice. The handlebar camera had caught Faulkner's approach, his hand on the holster, his face, his body language, and every word of the exchange from the moment he reached her. The jacket camera had captured everything from the front. Her hands on the hood, Faulkner's grip on her wrist, Benson's position, the arrival of the neighbors, all of it. The audio was clean. Every word was clear. She watched herself cite case law at two officers who had no response to any of it. She watched Faulkner's hand drop. She watched his face change. She closed the footage window and opened a new document. Formal complaint. Cedarwood Heights Police Department. Internal Affairs Division. She typed steadily and without pause for 40 minutes. Every fact in order. Every timestamp documented. Every violation named correctly. When she was done, she read it back once, made 2 small corrections, and saved it. She would submit it first thing in the morning. She closed the laptop and looked out the kitchen window at the driveway, where the red Ducati sat cooling in the afternoon sun. They have no idea what they just started. Candace was up before 6. She had slept 4 hours, maybe 5, and woke up the way she always woke up. All the way, immediately. No slow climb back to the surface. She had been sleeping in her old childhood bedroom for the past 2 months, in the same house where she grew up, in the same neighborhood she had left at 18 to enlist. When the doctors cleared her for leave, coming back to Andrew's house had been the only decision that made any sense. 90 days was too long to spend alone in a hotel, and too short to justify renting somewhere. Her father had her old room ready before she even landed. She had been here since day 1 of her leave. She would be here until the last day of it. She made coffee in Andrew's kitchen, sat at his table, and read through her complaint one final time. It was good, precise and thorough, and every claim in it was supported by footage she had saved in 3 separate places. She had the complaint drafted, the video files attached, and the Internal Affairs email address pulled up on screen. Her finger was hovering over the send button when she heard it. The familiar creak of the hallway floorboards, the slow, heavy footsteps that had been the soundtrack of her entire childhood. The sound of Andrew Bishop moving through his house when something was sitting on him wrong. She had heard that walk after her mother got sick. She had heard it the night before Candace shipped out for her first deployment. She heard it now. Andrew appeared in the kitchen doorway in his robe and slippers. He had his phone in one hand and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, which meant he had been up for a while before she heard him move. His face was tight in a way she hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. "Don't submit that yet," he said, nodding at her laptop. "Something's happened." She pushed her coffee to one side and turned the laptop to face the wall. "Sit down, Dad." He sat. She listened without interrupting. That was another thing the Army had trained into her. The ability to receive bad information without letting it show on her face, even when there was no one in the room to see it. Though in this case, there was someone. Her father was watching her the whole time he talked, the way he had always watched her, looking for the thing she was trying not to show. Andrew told her first about the video. The neighbor across the street, the one who had been filming openly on his phone, had posted 4 minutes of footage the previous evening. Not the whole stop, just the end of it. Candace citing case law, Faulkner's hand on her wrist, Benson's flat, contemptuous stare, and the moment Faulkner stepped back and told her she was free to go. 40,000 shares. In 6 hours. Okay, Candace said. That's not the part you need to worry about, Andrew said. She waited. Faulkner had filed his report the previous afternoon, hours before the video went up, hours before Candace had even finished typing her complaint. He had gotten there first, had sat down at his department computer while Candace was still riding home on the Ducati, and had put his version of events on the official record before she could put hers anywhere. Candace pulled up the department's public statement on her laptop while Andrew talked. Chief Archer Aldrich had released it at 9 o'clock the previous evening, after the video had already started spreading, which meant he had seen it and written his response to it carefully. She read it slowly. The statement said that Officers Faulkner and Benson had conducted a lawful investigative stop in response to a citizen complaint about a suspicious motorcycle. It said the subject of the stop had been uncooperative and had escalated the encounter through threatening and erratic behavior. It said the department stood fully behind its officers, and at the very bottom, in 2 short sentences clearly meant to preempt the footage entirely, it noted that both officers' body cameras had experienced a technical malfunction during the stop and that the recordings were inconclusive. Both cameras, same stop, same malfunction. Candace stared at those 2 sentences for a long moment. Candace. Andrew leaned forward across the table. There's more. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Opened them. Someone connected to the police union. Andrew didn't have a name yet, just a source he trusted. Had contacted her army base the previous evening. They had submitted a formal written inquiry to her commanding officer suggesting that Candace's behavior during the stop raised questions about her fitness for continued active duty service. The inquiry used words like volatile and confrontational and pattern of aggression. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. They contacted my base, Candace said. Last night, before the statement even went out. She looked at her father across the table. In the house where she had grown up. In the kitchen where he had made her breakfast every morning before school for 18 years. 15 years of service. 3 deployments. A record without a single mark on it. And in less than 24 hours, 2 officers who had illegally detained her on a public street had filed a false report, convinced their chief to back them publicly, buried their own evidence behind a malfunction story, and reached all the way to her military career. All because she knew her rights. All because she didn't flinch. "Dad," she said quietly, "how many days do I have left?" She already knew the answer. She had been counting since the day the doctors cleared her ankle and told her she could finish out her leave however she chose. Andrew looked at her for a moment before he answered. 21 days. Candace set her phone face down on the table. She looked at her hands. The same hands that had drafted legal briefs in the field, loaded magazines in the dark, held things together when everything around her was coming apart. 3 weeks. She almost smiled. That's more than enough. She gave herself until 7 o'clock to be angry. That was it. 1 hour. She sat at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee while Andrew made breakfast, and she let herself feel all of it. The cold fury of being lied about in an official report. The particular violation of having her military record used as a weapon against her. The exhausting, bone-deep recognition that this was exactly how it always went for women who looked like her when they stood up to men who looked like them. She felt it fully. She didn't push it down or dress it up or tell herself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Then 7 o'clock came. She pulled her legal pad to the center of the table, uncapped her pen, and wrote 3 names at the top of the page: Captain Amanda Banks, Katie Emerald, Johnson Merritt. She drew a line under them and got to work. Amanda Banks picked up on the second ring. "I already saw it," Amanda said before Candace could speak. Her voice had that quality it always had in the field: calm the way a locked door is calm, solid all the way through. All of it: the video, the department statement, and the union inquiry to your base. I've been up since 4. I know what you need. I'm already on it." Candace heard papers moving on the other end of the line. "I've contacted JAG about the inquiry. The timing alone is a problem for them. They filed it the same night you were stopped, before any formal complaint process was initiated. That's not concern for conduct standards. That's retaliation. And I'm going to make sure it's documented as exactly that." Candace exhaled slowly. "Amanda, don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better. You know that." "I know." "Good." A pause. "I'm going to get you a name. Civilian attorney, civil rights, federal level. Someone who can take what you have on those cameras and build something that doesn't go away quietly." Another pause, shorter. "How are you holding up?" Candace looked across the kitchen at Andrew, who was moving between the stove and the counter with the careful, deliberate motions of a man trying to make himself useful when there was nothing useful he could do. "I'm fine," Candace said. "I'm focused." "That's my soldier," Amanda said, and hung up. 22 hours later, Amanda sent a name and a number. Katie Emerald, civil rights attorney, Tampa. "Call her." Candace called. Katie answered with the kind of professional directness that skipped pleasantries entirely and went straight to substance. Candace walked her through the full stop. Every detail in order from the moment the lights came on to the moment she rode away. Katie listened without interrupting, which Candace respected immediately. When Candace finished, Katie said, "Send me both recordings. Unedited, full length tonight." Candace sent them within the hour. Katie called back the next morning. "I've watched everything twice," she said. "The plate return, the continued detention, the physical contact with your wrist, all of it on camera, all of it clean. And the false report filed against someone with documented recordings that directly contradict it." A brief pause. "This is a federal civil rights case, Sergeant Bishop. A strong one. I'd like to represent you." Candace said, "When can you start?" "I already have," Katie said. The second call went to Johnson Merritt, a Tampa investigative journalist Candace had crossed paths with during an Army legal matter 3 years earlier. A thorough man. A careful one. The kind of journalist who checked everything twice and published nothing he couldn't defend line by line. She sent him both videos with a single instruction: "Hold them. Don't publish anything yet. I'll tell you when." Merritt confirmed receipt and asked no questions. He understood how to wait. The third move took 20 minutes and required no phone call at all. Candace typed a formal written public records request to the Cedarwood Heights Police Department, citing Florida's Public Records Law, Chapter 119, requesting the full complaint history filed against officers Alfred Faulkner and Benji Benson for the past 5 years. She printed it, signed it, photographed it, and sent it by both email and certified mail. She saved the confirmation receipts in the folder on her laptop labeled Evidence, which now had 41 items in it. Then she closed the laptop and looked out the kitchen window. 3 moves in 48 hours. Clean, sequenced, deliberate. Each one laying the foundation for the next. 21 days of leave remaining. 3 weeks to build something they couldn't walk away from. Now she waited and watched to see what the department would do. The union representative's name was Gaby Fitchman. Candace found that out by watching him on the local news at 7 o'clock the next morning, sitting across from a Tampa news anchor with his hands folded on the desk and a look on his face like a man who had done this before and expected it to work the same way it always had. What we saw in that video, Fitchman said, was a small portion of a longer encounter, taken completely out of context. Our officers followed the proper procedure at every step. What you're not seeing, what that video deliberately doesn't show, is the level of aggression and hostility they were dealing with from the very beginning of that stop. The anchor asked about the clean plate return. Fitchman smiled patiently. A stolen vehicle report had been called in. Our officers were doing their jobs. The fact that the plate came back clean doesn't mean the stop wasn't lawful. It means it was resolved the way it was supposed to be. And the body camera malfunction? Equipment failures happen? It's unfortunate timing, but that's all it is. Candace watched the whole segment without moving from the kitchen table. When it was over, she picked up her coffee, finished it, and went to refill it. Andrew was standing in the kitchen doorway. His jaw was tight. "Don't," Candace said quietly, without turning around. "Save it." By noon, the talk radio had started. She didn't listen to it herself. Andrew told her about it, his voice getting tighter with every sentence. A host named Ron Beckley on a local AM station had spent 40 minutes on Candace that morning. He called her combative. He said she had gone looking for a confrontation and found one. He said that any reasonable person, his words, reasonable person, would have simply cooperated with the officers and been on their way in 5 minutes. "She wants to throw legal terminology at two cops doing their jobs," Beckley said, according to Andrew, "because she thinks that makes her special. It doesn't make her special, it makes her difficult." Candace wrote down the name Ron Beckley on her legal pad, underlined it once. The social media campaign started quietly and built fast. She found the first post at 2 in the afternoon, an anonymous account with a stock photo for a profile picture and 11 followers, describing Candace as a troubled soldier who was using her medical leave to pursue a personal vendetta against law enforcement. The post had 400 shares. She found the second one an hour later. Different account, same pattern. This one suggested that her legal knowledge was rehearsed, that she had staged the stop deliberately, had ridden into that neighborhood specifically to provoke an encounter she could film. It had 1,000 shares and climbing. By evening, there were 11 posts she could identify, each one from a different anonymous account, each one hitting the same notes with the same language, in a way that didn't happen by accident. Volatile, aggressive, troubled, the same words from the union's inquiry to her base, the same words that Faulkner had put in his report. One post, the one that spread furthest, the one that made Andrew put his phone face down on the table and walk out of the room, said this: "A soldier with anger management issues is on leave in your neighborhood. Ask yourself, is that someone you feel safe around?" Candace read it twice, felt the specific cold burn of it, the way it was crafted to make her race and her service work against her simultaneously, to turn the thing she had spent 15 years building into evidence of danger rather than proof of character. She screenshotted it, saved it to the folder. She screenshotted all of them. The letter from the Cedarwood Heights PD Internal Affairs Division arrived in the late afternoon mail. Andrew brought it to the kitchen table without a word. It was 4 sentences long. It acknowledged receipt of her complaint. It assigned her a case number. It stated that her complaint would be reviewed in accordance with departmental procedure. It said she would be contacted if additional information was required. 4 sentences. A case number. No timeline. No investigator's name. No acknowledgement of the footage she had attached or the specific violations she had documented. Candace read it once. Then she photographed it and added it to the evidence folder. The folder now had 63 items in it. She closed the laptop and sat back in her chair. 19 days of leave remaining. The machine had turned on her the way machines always turned on people who challenged them. Loudly, quickly, and from every direction at once. She had known it was coming. She had been counting on it. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, 4 days after Candace had sent the public records request by certified mail and email. 4 days of watching the social media campaign grind forward, of monitoring the department's public silence, of adding items to the evidence folder every morning like a soldier cataloging ammunition before a battle. Andrew brought it in from the mailbox without opening it and set it on the kitchen table in front of her. It was thicker than she expected. That was either a good sign or a bad one. She opened it carefully and spread the contents flat. It was not the full response. She knew that immediately. The cover letter, signed by someone in the department's records division whose title was Administrative Compliance Officer, stated that certain materials had been withheld pending legal review and that additional records would be provided within 30 days, as permitted under Florida statute. 30 days. Candace would be back on base in 15. She set the cover letter aside and read what they had sent. It took her 11 minutes to read through everything. When she was done, she sat very still for a moment. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again, slower this time, making notes on her legal pad in her small, precise handwriting. 6 prior complaints against Officer Alfred Faulkner over 5 years. 4 against Officer Benji Benson. Every single one dismissed. Every single dismissal carrying the same notation, word for word, complaint after complaint, year after year. Complaint reviewed and found to lack merit. IAD. No investigator's name. No summary of findings. No explanation of what specifically had been reviewed or how the lack of merit conclusion had been reached. Just that one line, stamped at the bottom of each complaint form like a rubber seal applied without reading what was underneath it. Candace underlined the notation on the first complaint, then the second, then the third. By the fourth, she stopped underlining and just stared at the page. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a system. Someone had decided, at some point, that this was how complaints against these 2 officers would be handled. Not investigated, not reviewed in any meaningful sense, just processed and buried under a line of administrative language designed to look like due diligence. She kept reading. 3 of Faulkner's 6 complaints had been filed by black motorists. She noted that, without comment, just wrote the number on her legal pad and circled it. The 5th complaint stopped her. It had been filed 3 years ago. The complainant's name was Cyril Armour. Age listed as 68 at the time of filing, which put him at 71 now. Address: 44112 Birchwood Drive, Cedarwood Heights. 2 streets from where Candace had been stopped. She read his complaint slowly. Armour had been riding a motorcycle, a Kawasaki, dark blue, through the same neighborhood on a Sunday morning when Faulkner pulled him over. Faulkner had approached with his hand on his holster, had informed Armour the bike had been reported stolen, had dismissed Armour's documentation without properly reviewing it, had detained him on the side of the road for 26 minutes, had released him without explanation or apology when a second patrol unit arrived and the plate return confirmed the bike was registered to Armour. Armour had written his complaint in careful, precise longhand. He had attached a copy of his registration. He had noted Faulkner's badge number, the patrol car number, and the time of the stop down to the minute. He had done everything right. The dismissal notation at the bottom of his complaint was identical to every other one in the stack. Complaint reviewed and found to lack merit. IAD. Candace set the paper down. Andrew had been reading over her shoulder for the last 5 minutes. She had heard him go still somewhere around the 3rd complaint and hadn't heard him move since. Now she looked up at him. His face had changed. Not the tight, controlled anger she had been watching for days. Something older than that. Something that looked like recognition. "Dad?" she said. You know this name? Andrew reached out and picked up Armour's complaint form. He read it for a moment, though she could tell he didn't need to. Cyril Armour, he said quietly. We've gone to the same church for 30 years. He set the paper down, picked up his phone, dialed without looking up the number. It rang twice. Cyril, Andrew said. It's Andrew Bishop. A pause. My daughter needs to meet you. Cyril Armour's house was exactly 2 streets from where Candace had been stopped. She noticed that when she turned onto Birchwood Drive the following morning. Noticed the distance, the same oak trees, the same clean sidewalks and manicured lawns, the same neighborhood, the same street type, the same quiet that had surrounded her on Cedarwood Lane 6 days ago when the patrol car fell in behind her. She parked in front of number 4412 and sat for a moment. The house was well kept, white trim, a small garden along the front path that someone tended carefully, a wooden rocking chair on the porch that had the settled, permanent look of something used every day. She was still reaching for the door handle when the front door opened. Cyril Armour was already there. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who had been athletic once and still carried the frame of it. 71 years old, with close-cropped white hair and reading glasses hanging from the collar of his shirt. He looked at Candace from the porch with an expression she recognized, the careful, measuring look of someone who had learned not to extend trust quickly because the cost of misplacing it was too high. She stepped out of the car and walked up the front path. Mr. Armour, she said, I'm Candace Bishop, Andrew's daughter. He studied her for a moment. Then something in his face shifted, not quite relaxing, but settling, like a decision made. I know who you are, he said. I've seen the video. He pushed the screen door open. Come inside. He led her to his kitchen table. It was already set for the conversation. That was the first thing she noticed. A manila folder sat in the center of the table, thick and worn at the edges, the way folders get when they've been opened and closed many times over many years. A yellow legal pad beside it, a pen laid straight across the top. He had been waiting for this meeting long before Andrew called. Sit down, he said. She sat. He sat across from her, folded his hands on the table, and began. His account was methodical and precise, in a way that told Candace he had told it to himself many times, had kept it sharp and accurate in his memory, the way you keep something sharp when you believe it will matter someday. It was a Sunday morning 3 years ago. He had been riding his Kawasaki through the neighborhood, a route he had ridden every Sunday for 2 years. Faulkner had pulled out behind him on the same stretch of road where Candace had been stopped. Same lights, same approach. Hand on the holster before a single word was spoken. The bike has been reported stolen. The same words. The exact same words. Armour had produced his license, registration, and insurance. Faulkner had held them without reading them, had run the plate, had received the clean return, had kept Armour standing on the side of that road for 26 more minutes while he waited for backup that wasn't needed for any lawful reason Candace could identify. When the second unit arrived and confirmed the plate, Faulkner had handed Armour back his documents and walked away. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Armour had filed his complaint that same afternoon. I believed in the process, he said. His voice was even. Not bitter, something past bitter. Something that had moved through bitterness and come out the other side into a hard, clear place. I was a school teacher for 31 years. I taught civics. I taught my students that the system had mechanisms, that if you used them correctly, they worked. He looked at the folder on the table. I used them correctly. He opened the folder and turned it to face Candace. The original complaint form. The IAD dismissal letter. 6 pages of handwritten notes in a teacher's careful script. And at the back, 3 photographs. taken on his phone the day of the stop, showing the patrol car, the street, and Armour standing beside his Kawasaki. He had documented everything, just like Candace, and it had made no difference at all. She called Katie from the car before she had even reached the end of Birchwood Drive. She laid out everything: Armour's account, his documentation, the identical language of his dismissal, the identical profile of his stop. Katie listened without a word. When Candace finished, Katie was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I'm filing the federal complaint today," she said. 42 U.S.C., paragraph 1983. Faulkner, Benson, and the department. How does this change things? It changes everything, Katie said. One incident is an allegation. 2 identical incidents, same officer, same neighborhood, same profile, same dismissal, that's a documented pattern. And a documented pattern is something a federal court takes very seriously. Candace stared at the road ahead. "File it," she said. Johnson Merritt published at 6 o'clock in the morning. Candace was already awake when her phone lit up with his message. "It's live. 2 words." She opened the link and read the entire piece at the kitchen table while the coffee brewed and the house was still quiet around her. It was thorough. It was precise. It was exactly the kind of journalism that didn't editorialize because it didn't need to. The facts were doing all the work. Merritt had run both unedited videos side by side with the text of Faulkner's official report. The contradictions weren't subtle. They were structural. The report described Candace as erratic and threatening. At the exact moments the footage showed her standing with her hands visible, speaking in a level voice, citing case law. The report claimed both officers had attempted to de-escalate. The footage showed Faulkner's hand closing around her wrist. The body camera malfunction section was its own paragraph. Merritt had pulled the department's equipment maintenance records through a separate public records request, records the department apparently hadn't thought to protect. The records showed that Faulkner's body camera had malfunctioned during 2 prior incidents involving complaints. Benson's had malfunctioned once before. All 3 prior malfunctions had occurred during stops that resulted in dismissed complaints. Merritt hadn't used the word pattern. He hadn't needed to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Cyril Armour's account ran in full. His photographs, his complaint form, the dismissal notation. 31 years as a schoolteacher, and the system he had taught his students to trust had handed him a rubber stamp and called it justice. Candace read that section twice. By 8 o'clock, the story had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By 10, it was everywhere. Andrew sat at the kitchen table with his phone and read the headlines aloud, one after another, in a voice that started controlled and got quieter as the list grew longer. Not quieter from sadness. Quieter from something that looked like awe. The particular awe of a man who had watched something be ignored for 40 years and was now watching the same thing be impossible to ignore. By early afternoon, several hundred people had gathered on the sidewalk outside the Cedarwood Heights Police Department. Candace watched the live stream on her laptop. The crowd was orderly and loud. People held handmade signs. An older woman near the front was holding a photograph of Cyril Armour, his face printed on a piece of poster board, his name written underneath in large letters. Candace's phone had stopped being manageable around noon. She turned off the notifications and set it face down. Chief Aldrich called the press conference at 5 o'clock. Candace, Andrew, and Amanda Banks, who had driven down from base that morning and was now sitting in Andrew's armchair with her shoes off and her reading glasses on, watched it live on the television in the living room. Aldrich stood at a podium in front of the department seal. He was a large man who had clearly spent the day trying to look smaller. Shoulders drawn in, voice carefully measured. The practiced posture of someone who had legal counsel standing just off camera. He said the department took all allegations of misconduct seriously. He said the safety and dignity of every resident of Cedarwood Heights was his personal priority. He said that in light of the serious questions raised by the published reporting, he was placing Officers Faulkner and Benson on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full internal review. The crowd outside the building, visible on a second live stream Candace had open on her laptop, erupted. Cheering, sustained and genuine, the sound of people who had been waiting for something and finally heard it. Andrew exhaled slowly. He put his hand flat on his knee and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Candace felt it too, the sudden loosening in her chest, the pull toward relief. It had worked. The footage, Armour's account, Merritt's reporting, Katie's federal complaint, all of it had moved something that looked completely immovable 4 days ago. She almost let herself believe it was over. Amanda reached over and refilled her coffee from the pot on the end table. She did it without looking up from the television. Then she said, quietly and without particular emotion, "Administrative leave with pay isn't accountability. That's a vacation." The loosening in Candace's chest tightened again. She knew. She had always known. But she had let herself feel it for a moment, and she didn't regret that. She looked through the living room window at the driveway. At the red Ducati parked in the afternoon shadow of Andrew's oak tree. 13 days of leave remaining. The crowd outside the department was still cheering. Enjoy it, Candace thought. This part doesn't last. They waited until Friday. Candace had expected that. In her experience, institutions always buried their bad news on Friday afternoons, late enough that the morning news cycle had already closed, early enough to claim they hadn't delayed. By the time anyone organized a response, it was the weekend, and weekends had a way of cooling things down that Monday mornings rarely reversed. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Katie on the phone, and Andrew across from her when the department's press release hit her email at 4:47 in the afternoon. She read the subject line once, Internal Affairs Review, Findings and Determination. "It's here," she said. Katie said, "Read it to me." The report was 6 pages long and said almost nothing. The language was careful in the way that language is careful when it has been written by someone whose primary goal is to be unquotable. Every sentence hedged, every conclusion arrived at through passive constructions that made it impossible to identify who had decided what or on what basis. The findings were as follows. The stop had been conducted within departmental guidelines. The initial approach had been consistent with standard procedure for a stolen vehicle call. Candace's detention following the clean plate return had been brief. The report used the word brief 3 times in 2 paragraphs and had not constituted an unlawful seizure under applicable Fourth Amendment standards. Officer Faulkner's written report had accurately reflected the encounter as he perceived and experienced it. The body camera malfunction had been reviewed by the department's technical division and determined to be an equipment failure unrelated to officer conduct. The malfunction had affected both units simultaneously due to a shared firmware update installed earlier that week. Both officers had been found to have acted within the scope of their duties and in accordance with departmental policy. Effective immediately, Officers Faulkner and Benson were reinstated to full active duty. Candace read the last line twice. Then she set her phone flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "They cleared them," she said. Katie's voice on the other end of the line was steady. "I know. Keep reading. There's a second document attached." The second document was addressed to the Florida Bar's Grievance Board. The department's attorney, Edison Bryson, had filed a formal complaint against Katie Emerald. The complaint alleged that Katie had improperly obtained and publicly released confidential internal complaint records through her public records request, in violation of attorney conduct standards. It requested a full grievance investigation and cited 3 separate bar rules. Candace read it carefully. Every word of it was precise and deliberate. Written not to win, she understood, but to consume. A grievance investigation would take months. It would require Katie to respond, to document, to defend herself before a board while simultaneously building a federal civil rights case. It was designed to divide her attention and shadow her credibility at exactly the moment it mattered most. "How serious is this?" Candace asked. "It's frivolous," Katie said. "The records were obtained through a lawful public records request. They know that. But frivolous cases still require responses, and responses take time." A pause. "They're trying to slow me down." "Can they?" "No," Katie said. Simply, flatly, the way Amanda spoke when a question had only one answer. "No, they cannot." The third blow arrived 40 minutes later. Andrew was in the kitchen when his phone rang. He looked at the screen and then looked at Candace, and the expression on his face told her everything before he said a word. It was Amanda. The Army inquiry had escalated. Candace's commanding officer had received an official formal request. Not an inquiry anymore, but a structured review, asking whether Candace's conduct during the stop was consistent with the standards expected of active duty personnel. The review had a response deadline. It was real, and it was moving, and it had enough institutional weight behind it now that Amanda's JAG contacts couldn't simply dismiss it without a formal response of their own. Candace's return to duty was no longer certain. The room was very quiet when Andrew put the phone down. She sat at the kitchen table with 3 documents open on her phone screen: the IAD clearance, the bar complaint against Katie, and Amanda's text summarizing the Army review, and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since the morning this all began. Not fear, not defeat. Something colder and more focused than either of those things. The feeling she got in the field when the situation had deteriorated past the point of a controlled response and required something different entirely. 11 days of leave remaining. Enough, she thought. We do this now. Andrew made dinner. Candace didn't ask him to. He just got up from the table after she put her phone down and went to the kitchen and started cooking. That was what he did when things were bad, when her mother was sick, when Candace shipped out for her first deployment, when the call came that she'd been injured overseas. He cooked. He needed his hands busy and his back to the room so nobody could see his face while he got himself together. She let him. She sat at the table with the 3 documents still open on her phone and listened to the sounds of the kitchen, the tap running, the refrigerator opening and closing, the particular rhythm of Andrew Bishop making something out of whatever was available, because the act of making something was the only thing he could control right now. 20 minutes later, he set a plate in front of her. Rice and beans and fried plantains, the meal he had made her every Friday night of her childhood. She looked at it for a moment. "Dad," she said quietly. "Eat first," he said. She ate. He sat across from her when his own plate was half finished and put his fork down and looked at her the way he had looked at her across this same table her whole life. Directly, without softening. Because Andrew Bishop had never believed that kindness required dishonesty. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I know. Let me say it anyway." He folded his hands on the table. "I have watched this department operate for 40 years, Candace. 40 years. I watched them do this to people in this neighborhood before you were born. I watched them do it when you were a child sitting right where you're sitting now. I watched them file complaints in the trash and put good people through hell for the crime of knowing their rights." His voice was even and quiet, and carried the particular weight of someone reporting facts rather than feelings. They have a system. It isn't broken. It works exactly the way it was designed to work, which is to exhaust people until they give up. Candace watched her father's face. They have Brisson and whatever attorneys the union is paying. They have Aldrich running interference. They have the IAD process in their pocket. And now they have the Army review moving with a deadline attached. He looked at her steadily. Their whole strategy, the false report, the bar complaint against Katie, the union inquiry to your base, none of it is designed to win an argument. It's designed to run the clock. They know you have 11 days. They know when you go back to base, this loses momentum. Cases without momentum get settled quietly, or dropped entirely. He paused. That is how they have always won. The kitchen was quiet around them. The old clock above the sink ticked. Candace looked at the wall beside the refrigerator, where her mother's calendar still hung. The same calendar that had been there since the year before she died. Never taken down because Andrew couldn't bring himself to do it. June. Her mother had stopped at June. She thought about Cyril Armour at this same kitchen table 2 streets over, alone with his folder and his careful notes, and his faith in a process that had already decided not to see him. She thought about whoever came after her, if she walked away. Whoever rode through this neighborhood next year, next month, next week, and got lights in their mirror, and a hand on a holster, and a lie filed in their name before they could get home. She thought about that person not having footage, not having Katie, not having Amanda, not knowing the case law or having a father who knew Cyril Armour's phone number. She looked at her hands flat on the table. 15 years of everything those hands had done. Every brief drafted under fire, every position held when holding it seemed impossible. Every moment she had been told that the situation was beyond recovery and had found a way through it anyway. 11 days. She looked up at her father. Andrew was watching her with the patient, certain expression of a man who had raised a soldier and knew one when he saw one and was waiting for her to remember what she was. Then I use every single day, Candace said. Her voice was quiet and level, and left no room for any other interpretation. We end this fast. We end it loud. She held her father's gaze across the table where she had done her homework and eaten 30 years of Friday night dinners, and grown into the woman she was. And we make sure they can never do it to anyone again. Andrew looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and finished his dinner. Amanda arrived at 7 in the morning with a legal pad, a thermos of her own coffee, and the focused, unhurried energy of a woman who had spent 30 years solving problems that other people had already declared unsolvable. She sat at Andrew's kitchen table, uncapped her pen, and looked at Candace across the table. "Tell me everything we have," she said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Candace talked for 20 minutes without stopping. The stop, the footage, the false report, Faulkner's history, Armour's account, the IAD clearance, the bar complaint against Katie, the Army review with its deadline. All of it laid out in order, clean and precise, the way she would brief a mission. Amanda listened without interrupting. When Candace finished, Amanda looked down at her legal pad, where she had been making notes in her small, dense handwriting. She studied them for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, here's how we take this apart." Andrew had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table with his coffee and a folder of his own. He had been building something over the past several days, quietly, methodically, in the way he did everything, pulling on threads that 40 years of living in Cedarwood Heights had put in his hands. He opened the folder and set 3 documents on the table. Edison Bryson, the department's attorney, the man who had filed the bar complaint against Katie, had represented the Cedarwood Heights PD in 3 prior civil rights settlements. All 3 had been sealed. All 3 had been paid out of municipal funds without any admission of wrongdoing from the department. Andrew had found references to 2 of them buried in city council budget, minutes from prior years. Line items described only as legal settlements, civil matters, and had tracked down a retired city clerk who remembered a 3rd. 3 sealed settlements. The same attorney. The same department. A pattern of paying quietly to make things disappear rather than changing anything that produced the complaints in the first place. Candace looked at the documents. Then she looked at Amanda. Amanda was already reaching for her phone. The call took 40 minutes. Amanda's contact at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division was a woman named Lorna Morse, whom Amanda had worked with a decade earlier during an Army investigation with civilian jurisdiction overlap. Candace sat across the table and listened to Amanda lay out the full picture. Armour's case, Candace's case, the 6 dismissed complaints, the 3 sealed settlements, the systematic IAD burial process, the coordinated reinstatement, and the retaliatory Army inquiry. In the same methodical, unemotional tone she used to brief senior officers. When Amanda finished, Lorna Morse asked 4 questions. Amanda answered all 4. Then Morse said she had enough to open a preliminary review under the pattern or practice statute. She said she would need the documentation Andrew had sourced, the complaint records Candace had obtained, and Katie's federal filing. She said if the preliminary review confirmed what she was hearing, a full federal investigation would follow. Amanda said, "It will confirm it." Morse said she would be in touch within 48 hours. Amanda ended the call and set her phone on the table. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "That's move 1, Amanda said. Move 2 happened that same afternoon. Amanda's JAG contacts had been working the Army review since she first flagged it. What they had built over the past several days was a precise documentary timeline, every date, every filing, every communication, that established one fact with complete clarity. The Union's initial inquiry to Candace's base had been filed the same evening as the traffic stop, before Candace had submitted any formal complaint, before any conduct review process had been initiated through proper channels. The inquiry hadn't followed a complaint. It had preceded one. It hadn't been a response to Candace's behavior. It had been a preemptive strike designed to damage her standing before she could use it. That wasn't a conduct concern. That was retaliation. And retaliation against a service member for exercising constitutional rights was a problem the Army took seriously in a way that the Cedarwood Heights PD did not. Amanda filed the formal JAG response that evening. The Army review was suspended pending the federal investigation's findings. Candace's record, 15 years, untouched, was formally protected. Her return to duty date held. When Amanda told her, Candace sat very still for a moment. "It's not over," Amanda said immediately. "Don't let it feel over." "I know," Candace said. She did know. But she let herself feel it for exactly 5 seconds. The particular relief of watching something she had built for 15 years survive an attack designed to destroy it. Then she picked up her phone and called Cyril Armour. "Cyril," she said, "it's time." Cyril Armour opened the door before Candace reached the porch. He had been expecting her. She could tell by the way he stood, coat already on, keys in his hand, the particular readiness of a man who had been waiting for this moment for 3 years, and wasn't going to waste a second of it now that it had arrived. "Mr. Armour," Candace said, "are you sure about this?" He looked at her steadily from the doorway. "I've been sure since the day I filed that complaint and got a rubber stamp back in the mail." He pulled the door shut behind him and walked past her down the front path. "You said it's time. Let's go." Johnson Merritt met them at a quiet conference room he used for sensitive interviews, a plain space with good natural light and no distractions. He had a single camera on a tripod and a colleague handling audio. He introduced himself to Armour, shook his hand, and then stepped back and let Candace make the introduction. She said, "Mr. Armour, this is your time. You say what you need to say. Nobody is going to edit your words or tell you what to emphasize. This is your account. All of it." Armour sat down in front of the camera, straightened his collar, and folded his hands on the table. "Put the camera on me," he said. He spoke for 38 minutes. Candace sat against the wall behind Merritt and watched and did not say a word. She had heard Armour's account at his kitchen table days ago, had heard it in detail, had taken notes, had used it to build a federal case. But hearing it in front of a camera was different. Hearing it the way the world was about to hear it was different. Armour did not perform. He did not raise his voice or search for dramatic language or try to make himself sympathetic. He simply told the truth in the careful, precise way of a man who had taught other people to use words accurately for 31 years. He described the morning of the stop, the weather, the route he always took, the moment the lights came on behind him. He described Faulkner's hand on the holster before a single word had been spoken. He described standing on the side of the road with his documentation in his hand while Faulkner held it without reading it and looked at him the way nobody should ever be looked at. He described filing the complaint that same afternoon, writing it out in longhand, attaching the copies, mailing it to the address on the department website because he believed in the process. He described waiting 3 weeks for a response. He described opening the envelope and reading the 4 sentences that dismissed everything he had documented without a single specific acknowledgement of what he had written. He described putting the folder in his filing cabinet and driving past that same street corner every Sunday for 3 years. "I kept waiting," he said quietly, near the end. "I kept thinking someone would come. Someone with the tools to do something about it. Someone the department couldn't just mail a form letter to and consider the matter closed." He looked directly into the camera. "I kept every piece of paper because I knew this day would come. I just didn't know how long I'd have to wait for it." The room was completely silent when he finished. Merritt cleared his throat quietly. "Mr. Armour, thank you." Armour nodded once. He picked up his keys from the table and stood. The clip aired the following morning. By noon, it had been picked up nationally. By evening, a morning news anchor, a black woman in her 60s, had watched it live on air and paused for a long moment before she could continue. Candace watched it from Andrew's living room, watched Cyril Armour's face on the screen, watched 31 years of a schoolteacher's faith in a broken process sit quietly on camera and refuse to be anything less than completely dignified. Then she went to the kitchen. Andrew was already there. He had set his old camera on a stack of books at the end of the table, angled toward the chair where Candace always sat. He had adjusted the lamp twice for the light. He stepped back when she came in and looked at her. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. She sat down. She looked into the lens. She thought about what she wanted to say and realized she didn't need to organize it. It was already organized. It had been organizing itself since the morning the lights came on behind her on Cedarwood Lane. She talked for 40 minutes. Her enlistment at 18, 3 deployments, the friends she had lost and carried, coming home to her father's house and buying a red motorcycle because she needed 1 hour a day that belonged only to her. What that Tuesday morning had meant. Riding to her mother's grave, riding home, the simple, uncomplicated freedom of it. What happened when the patrol car fell in behind her. What they tried to do to her record afterward. What they tried to do to Cyril Armour 3 years ago. What they would keep doing to the next person, and the person after that, if nobody made it stop. She looked directly into the camera at the end. "I have 8 days of leave left," she said. "I am going back to serve this country when those 8 days are done. And I am going to use every single one of them, making sure this department never does this to anyone again." Andrew stopped the recording. The kitchen was quiet. "Post it," Candace said. She was asleep before midnight. By the time she woke up, it had 3 million views. Veterans organizations had shared it. Civil rights groups had shared it. Gold Star families had shared it. Ordinary people had shared it with a single caption that required no elaboration. "Watch this." The consequences came fast. That was the thing nobody warned you about when you spent weeks building a case. The way the end, when it finally arrived, moved at a completely different speed than everything that had come before it. All that grinding, careful, methodical work. And then the walls came down in a matter of days, like they had never been walls at all. Faulkner was terminated on a Tuesday. Not suspended, not placed on extended leave. Terminated, the word used in the official department communication that Katie forwarded to Candace that morning, along with a single line of her own. Effective immediately. On the record. Permanent. The department's own attorney had advised Chief Aldrich that defending Faulkner against Candace's jacket camera footage in federal court was not a viable legal strategy. The footage was clean and complete, and directly contradicted every material claim in his official report. Falsification of an official report was not a gray area. It never had been. The department had spent 2 weeks pretending otherwise, and the arrival of the DOJ investigation had ended that particular pretense entirely. Faulkner's badge and service weapon were surrendered the same morning. His pension was placed under formal review pending the federal findings. Candace read the termination notice twice and set her phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree in the front yard and said nothing for a long moment. She had not expected to feel as much as she felt. Benson resigned 2 days later, before the department could move against him formally. Candace wasn't surprised. Benson had always been a man who ran toward easy targets and away from accountability. The resignation fit the pattern perfectly. What he discovered quickly was that resigning didn't close the door behind him. The DOJ investigation named him individually. A separate state-level review of the body camera malfunction pattern, which investigators had now traced back across 5 incidents involving both officers, not 3, resulted in a formal referral to the state attorney's office. The word being used in the referral, Katie told Candace, was evidence tampering. Benson had handed in his badge to escape consequences and walked directly into larger ones. Chief Aldrich announced his retirement on a Thursday morning. The announcement used careful language about decades of service and the right time to pass the torch. The City Council's response used equally careful language about transition planning and new leadership. Between those two careful statements, if you read them side by side the way Andrew did at the kitchen table that morning, the message was unmistakable. The city manager's separate statement was less careful. It announced a full structural audit of the Cedarwood Heights Police Department, including its internal affairs processes, complaint handling procedures, and body camera maintenance records. An independent oversight committee would be established. Community input would be solicited. Andrew read that last part aloud. Then he folded the paper, set it on the table, and picked up his coffee. 40 years, he said quietly. Not bitter, just marking it. Acknowledging the distance between what should have been and what had taken this long to arrive. The Florida bar dismissed the grievance complaint against Katie Emerald in a single sentence on a Friday morning. Without merit. Katie texted Candace the dismissal notice with no additional comment. Candace texted back 2 words. File it. Katie filed the federal civil rights suit the following Monday. The civil settlement came before trial. Given the weight of evidence, the DOJ investigation, and the sustained national attention the case had maintained, the city's attorneys recommended settlement within 30 days of the suit being filed. The amount was significant. Candace didn't talk publicly about the number. That wasn't what any of this had been about. The community fund was Cyril Armour's idea. He had suggested it quietly, almost offhandedly, during one of the evening calls that had become a regular thing over the past weeks. A fund for residents who could document harm from the department's pattern of discriminatory stops. Katie built it into the settlement terms. Cyril Armour was the first claimant processed. He called Candace the afternoon his claim was approved. She could hear in his voice that it wasn't about the money for him either. It was about the piece of paper. The formal written acknowledgement from the city that his complaint had been real, that it had been mishandled, and that he had been right. 3 years of keeping that folder on his kitchen table, and now there was a document that said it had mattered. "I'm going to frame it," he told her. "Good," she said. 5 days before Candace reported back to base, she woke up early. Not because she had to, not because anything required her attention. She woke up the way she had woken up every morning of her leave, all the way, immediately, and lay still for a moment in her childhood bedroom, listening to the house. It was quiet. Andrew was still sleeping. Outside, through the curtains, the sky was doing that thing it did in Florida just before the sun fully cleared the tree line, turning gold and wide and impossibly clean. She got up, put on her riding jacket and gloves, and went out to the driveway. The red Ducati sat in the early light exactly where it always sat. She went through her pre-ride check the same way she always did. Methodical, complete, unhurried. Tires, mirrors, controls. She did it every time, not because she expected to find something wrong, but because the discipline of checking was its own kind of respect. For the machine, for the road, for the fact that some things deserved your full attention. She heard the screen door behind her. Andrew came out onto the porch in his robe, coffee in hand, and stood at the top of the steps. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table 4 days ago when she told him what she was going to do. The way he had looked at her when she left for her first deployment at 18. The patient, certain look of a man who knew his daughter completely and was not afraid of what she was capable of. She put her helmet on, fastened the chin strap. He raised his mug. She raised 2 fingers off the handlebar. She took the long way through Cedarwood Heights, past the corner of Cedarwood Lane where it had all started. She rode it slowly and looked at it. The same oak trees, the same clean sidewalks, the same quiet street, and felt something she hadn't felt here in weeks. Not the cold weight of that morning with the lights in her mirror. Something lighter than that. Something that had replaced it. She passed Birchwood Drive. Slowed without stopping. Cyril Armour was in his front yard with a watering can, tending to the small garden along his front path. He looked up when he heard the engine. He raised one hand. Slow. Deliberate. The gesture of a man marking a moment he wanted to remember. She nodded back. Then she rode out toward the highway and opened the throttle and let the Ducati do what it was built to do. The engine answered the way it always answered. Immediate, total, honest. The road opened up ahead of her, wide and straight and golden in the morning light. She was 38 years old. She was active duty. She was going back. In 5 days, she would be back on base, back in uniform, back in the life she had built for 15 years. The life 2 small men with badges had tried to take from her, and discovered too late that they were nowhere near equipped to touch. She rode, and didn't think about any of it. She just rode. The engine beneath her. The air around her. The road ahead of her going on as far as she could see. She had never, not once in her life, not in any country, not in any room, not on any street, surrendered ground she was entitled to hold. She wasn't about to start now. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.